What does the Justin Jefferson contract mean when it comes to the big picture outlook for the Minnesota Vikings? We know he deserved the money. We know he got the money, and we know there's not a lot of fluff to it. But now we have to talk about big picture. We have to talk about what the contract means, how they're going to be able to build a team with the contract. We've had plenty of discussions about the quarterback contract. Now it shifts to wide receiver. What does the outlook look for the salary cap, building the roster around Justin Jefferson? And we have Pro Football Focus's Trevor Sikkema, who also co-hosts the NFL Stock Exchange with friend of the show, Connor Rogers, joining us tonight. And we're going to talk all about the big picture, building the Minnesota Vikings for a potential Super Bowl run, and a brief outlook on the 2025 NFL Draft. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by Tyler Forness, publisher at The Sporting News, contributor on SKOL North's Purple Daily, publisher of Substack Run In Shooter, the host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, this time in the bottom right corner, he's producer Dave. And to my left, he is the lead draft analyst at Pro Football Focus and the co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange, Trevor Sikkema. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Tyler, it's so good to be with you, my friend. Excited to be on, chat a little Vikings football. Thankfully, Justin Jefferson gives us a lot to talk about now today, and I know we'll talk a little draft stuff too. So it's good to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think there's so many different ways to kind of look at it. And on the Sporting News, I wrote probably 15 different things kind of poking at little crevices. But let's talk about the contract because it's historic. It's the most for a non-quarterback in NFL history. But what I found most interesting is that the contract itself is the third highest adjusted salary cap percentage in NFL history for wide receivers. When you look at just the financials of the contract and what Justin Jefferson means, how do you feel coming out of that extension?
Well, I mean, it's certainly kind of like you open the show. There was nothing else that they were going to do, right? I mean, like he's a franchise cornerstone. You're going to sign him. It's just a matter of how much he was going to set the market. And sort of the unprecedentedness of the deal and the numbers that he signed are a reflection of a lot of things. I think they're a reflection of where the NFL is going, being more of a pass-happy league. Certainly, wide receivers carry a lot of like notoriety when it comes to being fan favorites and marketing and being able to really like sell the team and be the face of the franchise and things like that. And it just goes to show that wide receivers are able to carry that title. I don't want to say just as much as quarterbacks, but like other non-quarterback positions, I would say. So I think that all goes into it. But to me, the most fascinating part of Justin Jefferson's deal is what happens next. Because CeeDee Lamb is looking for a new contract. Jamar Chase is looking for a new contract. What do those deals look like? Because there are ways where you could argue that both of those players are similar to their team's impact and postseason outlook and Super Bowl chances. Like they carry the same value, if you will, that Justin Jefferson is able to carry. And so if they can sign deals that are similar to that, like maybe even not as much, just similar to that of Justin Jefferson, now you are talking about a true resetting of the market where you go, okay, now there's multiple examples of this is what wide receivers are getting paid. And to me, that changes a ton of things. Like, yes, the salary cap is going up every single year, but now you have to look at wide receiver truly. And I think we've been trending this direction, but like wide receiver, truly a premium position. Quarterback, unprecedented, very top. That's where a lot of the money goes. But for the longest time, it felt like it was a big three with where you allocate a lot of your salary cap. It was quarterback, it was offensive tackle, and it was pass rusher. Like those were the three areas. And then for some teams, the philosophy was a little different. Like, okay, some teams, used cornerback as a premium position, like a lockdown corner. Others would say wide receiver. Now I think that we're fully gravitating towards receiver being not just in the conversation, but unquestioned in that top 4. And that's a ripple effect everywhere, because to me, the higher the price tag goes for a wide receiver, now all of a sudden, when and where you draft them becomes a big deal, right? What's the thing that we always say? It's like, oh, the most valuable thing in sports is a quarterback, a franchise quarterback on a rookie contract. Why? Because it's capped at how much money that they can make. With wide receivers threatening the top 10, top 5, top 50, whatever it is of contracts in the NFL, now you have to look at drafting these guys and almost saying, not only do we need a wide receiver, this is a major impact on us financially if we can get a stud wide receiver on a rookie contract as well. So there's so many things that go into this, where Jefferson sort of resets the market himself. But if these other couple of dominoes are even close to that, now we're having a totally different conversation of how you have to view wide receiver, especially when you're going to draft one in the top 15.
So let's kind of pivot the conversation a little bit, because I think you bring up an interesting point about kind of wide receiver contracts almost becoming an albatross, where you can get guys on a rookie contract. And I know Marvin Harrison Jr., his 4-year deal is worth about $0.9 million more than Justin Jefferson's average annual value for the next 4 years. So my question for you is this: at what point, when you're talking about building a roster, at what point of talent at wide receiver are you going to stop paying them quote unquote market level money? Because you have guys like Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, kind of that second wave of wide receivers. They're making in the $24 million range. Whereas, would you pay Brandon Ayuk $32 million? And I view him as like a fringe top 10 kind of wide receiver, not truly elite, but really not that far off. How does that conversation shift for you when having these discussions? And with the salary cap going up exponentially, will it even matter that much?
I think it will still matter. Now, I think a sort of a tangent conversation that you could have is like, even though the salary cap is going up, the percentage of your salary cap can still only add up to 100. Whether the salary cap was 50 million, 100 million, 300 million, 100% is the whole piece of the pie, if you will. So no matter what you're getting, that chunk or percentage is still a reflection of kind of like where you were allocating your money. And just doing a little quick research before this show, I talked about how it feels like corner is such a prioritized position. You know, you got guys like Devon Witherspoon and Derek Stingley Jr. and Patrick Surtain and Sauce Gardner, these guys going in the top 10. Like, very clearly the NFL believes that if you have a lockdown corner on your hands, you go draft them, you get that value. But like total guaranteed money in the NFL when it comes to cornerback contracts, not nearly as high as it is for these other positions. So now I wonder if you go like, oh, well, where does that money come from? Teams aren't going to spend less on quarterback. We know that. They're not going to spend less on pass rushers. They're not going to spend less on pass protectors, specifically offensive tackles. Those are, again, those pillars of the game and those pillars of your salary cap. But I think that corner specifically is probably a position that would every now and then, you know, have a threat as a really high contract getting signed. Now I'm not so sure. I think that becomes more and more uncommon, and you see more wide receivers get paid. But to the beginning part of your question, it's a fascinating thing to watch unfold, because I would start to tell you that unless you have there's a lot of good receivers. So like, let's just say, I don't know, like a top 6, top 7 wide receiver that you are paying, like a top 6, top 7 wide receiver in the league that you are paying that top of market value.
Yeah.
It's probably better to use a first round pick on one than it is to spend $28-30 million of your cap to get a wide receiver one. And I don't want to insult anybody here. Like, these are still really talented players, but would you rather pay, like you said, like Brandon Ayuk, $32 million a year? Would you rather just draft a wide receiver in the first round? At that point, for where things are going, I think that drafting a wide receiver in the first round becomes more and more compelling to do, rather than sign a guy that might be on the outside of that, like top 6, top 7 wide receivers in the league.
And I think that's where the conversation is really going to be interesting to watch how things progress over the course of the next few years. But I do want to touch on your cornerback point. I think the reason why they're not getting so much money the position's volatile, and you could
For
be an
sure.
elite corner one year or even for a couple years. Like the one case I was pointing to is Xavier Rhodes, and that's something our fan base is really familiar with. All pro, first team, 2017. After 2019, he was cut because he just lost it. And I think that's a main reason why you're seeing that shift. Wide receivers don't really lose it like that unless it's injury based. Like you point to Odell Beckham Jr., injuries just derailed his career. Like
Right.
it wasn't because of like ability, it was injuries. And I think that's one of the reasons why. Plus, I want your take on this. I think cornerback is similar to offensive line, more about the sum of its parts than it is about one great player. Because if you don't have a weakness, like the 2021 Bengals, everybody made fun of Eli Apple, but he was a solid corner. And they had 3 solid corners across the board where you really didn't feel comfortable picking on any single one of them for any length of time because they were just all good football players. And I'm wondering if NFL teams are starting to view it as more of a collective bunch than it is about, I need that alpha.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, like that's exactly kind of how I would bring it up as well. Is it is, of course, secondary, a much more, it's a cohesive unit kind of a thing. It's a
Mm-hmm.
chemistry kind of a thing. You can't have a weak link in the chain, or else it all goes to hell. Those teams that play a little bit more man coverage, well, maybe you have the desire to pay whatever your CB1 is if you play this true shadow coverage, which not a lot of teams do anyways. But like, I wonder what Sauce Gardner's deal is going to be, because right now we're 2 years into his, potentially 5-year rookie contract. But let's face it, if Sauce even has like a good year next year, you're going to start hearing, contract whispers with this guy. And I think that it would be smart for his agent to do so because of the volatility of the position. But, I'm just looking up NFL contracts, and I'm looking at just guaranteed money at signing, which is not the same as practical guarantees, but guaranteed money at signing.
Mm-hmm.
You got to scroll all the way down for a corner, unless I'm missing somebody here. You got to scroll all the way down to Denzel Ward, who got $44.5 million guaranteed, and he's 38th in the NFL in total contracts. That shocks me that he's all the way down there, given, again, the draft capital that is invested in these top corners, where it feels like it's a major drop off once you get to that real money changing hands. It's sort of a little bit like the running back conversation, but not quite as stark of a difference there as it would be for running back. So yeah, I think that I agree with you that maybe. And maybe that just lends itself to not just corners, but when you say like, well, where's the money come from to pay the wide receivers now what they're demanding? Maybe it is more of maybe a little less for the offensive linemen, a little less for the corners, a little less for the secondary members, linebackers. It's I don't know. It seems like teams still like really want to pay linebackers, so that hasn't gone away too much, especially at the very top. But maybe just as a whole, that starts to go down a little bit as well, because as much as the salary cap is going up, you do have to take that money from somewhere.
Yeah, and that's why I think this whole conversation is so interesting, because of how the Vikings have structured their team so far. Kwesi has taken things in quite a different direction than Rick Spielman. At the end of Rick Spielman's drafts, he was taking premium positions. His last 2 first rounds were Justin Jefferson, Jeff Gladney, and Christian Darrisaw. Outside of that, he really made a lot of picks at non-premium spots, trying to bulk those up, where Kwesi hasn't really done a lot of that. The only player that he's taken high at a non-premium position, Ed Ingram at 59th overall in 2022. And that draft, it feels like eons ago for how he's used his draft strategy over the last couple of years. I wanted to ask you this because I had Max Chadwick on the other week, and I presented this question. He gave me some really interesting data about your game athletic score. And I feel like that and GPS data as a whole has been the massive shift we've seen in how Kwesi is drafted, because when you look at just the athletic testing, first year, it was all about the 10-yard split. After that, there has not been any link from player to player that you can kind of see that there's any cohesiveness with how he's trying to build this team. What do you see when it comes to his draft strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of all over the place. Now, obviously, I would say that this draft, more than others, I mean, you can look to the length and the size speed combination of Kyrie Jackson. Like
Mhm.
obviously the pass rush athleticism, the twitchiness, the bend of Dallas Turner. Quarterback is sort of a completely different conversation with McCarthy there at the very top. But I mean, okay, they prioritized size and speed with defensive back with Kyrie Jackson. They didn't really
Mhm.
do that with Jordan Addison, right? I mean, they totally looked at his size and kind of like threw it out the window. So yeah, I don't know if I think a lot of people try to pinpoint how should I say this? Like either thresholds or areas where
Mhm.
general managers really gravitate towards. And I think it's more open than we believe it is year in and year out. Like I don't think there are too many teams that hold really like firm thresholds. People who cover the Green Bay Packers, I think, do a really good job of that with Brian Gutekunst's drafts and even drafts of the past, where they go like, okay, they're not going to draft an offensive tackle with arms shorter than this length. They've never done this before, so clearly, if there's something already ingrained into how they're going about their scouting process, they will
Mhm.
continue to do that. But I really do wonder if just Adolfo Mensa kind of like came in and he talked about him being an analytics darling and very obsessed with as many numbers as he could get his hands on to try to really sift through a lot of this information. And yeah,
Mhm.
the in-game athleticism score is something that we've been testing out for a little bit now, and it's something that I've kind of been using for the first time primarily as I go through summer scouting for 2025, because this was kind of introduced to us at the PFF staff level recently. They've been working on it for a while now, and I know they've been tracking it for a while now, but now they feel like they've
Mhm.
got enough data to be able to sort of like present it and put guys in-game athleticism into like percentiles. And so you could see things like max speed, and you could see like, okay, well, this guy was a 97th percentile athlete for his in-game athleticism. And there's a lot of things that go into that. But yeah, that is information that NFL teams have, since PFF is a partner with all 32 NFL teams. So it is something that they can see. So outside of saying like, okay, well, like you said, like let's go towards 10-yard split guys at the combine, or
Mhm.
vertical jump or broad jump or 20-yard shuttle. Like now it's getting more and more common to be able to measure in-game athleticism, what
Mhm.
that part looks like, like when you actually have the pads and the cleats and the helmets on. And that's what we're trying to do at PFF to kind of quantify that athleticism a little bit better. But yeah, I wonder how much teams will start to utilize that now that we've got a lot more data on it.
Yeah, and I think like everybody talks about analytics where the brain will automatically associate analytics with Pro Football Focus, which makes sense. Market leader in as far as everything public facing, but analytics itself is just the analysis of data, and it doesn't
Right.
have to be in one lane. And I think that's where, like, especially fans of the Vikings, they're like, "Well, this, that, and the other thing," and it's like, "Well, that's not exactly how it works." I remember talking with Rick Spielman at one point, and he told me that they had some form of analytics that helped measure I don't know what the right word is, but like it was a like a personality test for wide
Oh,
receivers.
sure.
And that's how they found Stephon Diggs. And that's why they took him in the 5th round. And like you wouldn't necessarily think about that as analytics, but it works. And I'm very intrigued with the stock market background, how Kwesi Mensa is going to continue to grow this. But I say all that because I want to ask you about the Dallas Turner trade. Because when we're
Mhm.
talking about the Justin Jefferson contract, so much of it's going to be based on the salary cap and building around him. And you need draft capital to build around him. When it comes to just the trade, all the discussion is focused on how much draft capital the Vikings gave up. And I personally think it's unfair that they're grouping in the trade up to 23 in that conversation, because I think they're two separate moves. It was to try and get a quarterback. New England, to my knowledge, just told them no. Even though everybody says they wanted Drake May, that's what I've heard as well. Like when it comes to the Dallas Turner discussion, like why isn't there more conversation just about the player and the fit, and it all seems to be focused on draft capital? Do you think that's a fair point, or are we not focusing enough on them getting the ninth consensus player at 17?
Yeah, I think that there's wiggle room, right? And
Mhm.
some people even that I work with would say that there is less wiggle room, right? There's a lot of extremely smart people that I work with that are much more towards no, like you want to operate on value as much as possible because that's going to create the best long term health of how you draft and the team that you're putting together. But there is no doubt about it that football and team building, it can't just all be what you see with your eyes and scouting, and it can't all just be analytics. Like it's got to be some nuance
Mhm.
between the two of these parties. And so, for Dallas Turner, it was one of those situations where I felt like they gave up too much to go up to the spot that they were going up to.
Mhm.
But you look at this situation where there were really only 3 pass rushers that I could see as like, yeah, they're going to be impact players at the NFL level. And it was Latu, it was Dallas Turner, it was Jared Verse. And if
Mhm.
I remember correctly, Latu's off the board.
Yep.
They trade up for Turner because Turner and Verse at that they're very different prospects. They're very different players. So it's
Mhm.
not like I think sometimes fans get caught up in this like, well, all 3 of them are good. Well, not all 3 of them are going to be high on a team's board.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you liked Dallas Turner the most, like if you were a team that was like, we have Dallas Turner as edge rusher 1 in this class, the reason why you would do that is probably because of overall athleticism, flexibility, arm length, things like
Mhm.
that. And like who he is a stand-up outside linebacker. Like those things didn't exist really for Latu. Latu is not even close to
Mhm.
the athlete that Dallas Turner is.
Yeah.
Jared Verse, he's not a stand-up outside linebacker. He's a hand in the dirt defensive end. So
Mhm.
if you had Turner, and this could very well be the case with the Vikings and how they have their defense set up. If they had Turner as player 1, or sorry, not player 1, edge 1 in this class,
Mhm.
I can absolutely see why they were like, we have to go get him with Latu off the board. Because if you like Dallas Turner a lot, there's a chance you would like Latu as well, because both of them could be good stand-up players. They're good in the backfield. Like they've got that
Mhm.
quickness to them to get in the backfield. Turner is more just based off his natural athleticism and his physical gifts. Latu is much more hand usage and kind of how he's
Mhm.
crafted with his pass rushes. But with Latu off the board, I think the Vikings were staring at this situation like, we really think we still need a really good pass rusher. And Jared Verse is probably not nearly as high on their board. So you pay what you need to go up to get him. Now, you don't want to get carried away with that strategy, right? I
Mhm.
think that you want to be, this to me is sometimes the toughest part for teams. Really recognizing where you are in a winning window,
Yeah.
really being honest with where you are. Because if you are in a place where you think that overpaying to go get a specific guy to bring to your team is going to help really put you over the edge, either to compete for a division, make the playoffs, make a run, something like that, I'm all for it. If you really did your homework and you believe that this guy is a major difference maker for you, you pay a little bit extra, you
Mhm.
jump the teams that you need to, and you get that guy. For the Vikings, I suppose it makes sense. I think the last I saw of this, and I haven't looked it up kind of since the draft, the Vikings think they're getting a lot in comp picks next year, but the initial reports was like they think they seem to think they're getting more than maybe what the outside calculations believe they're going to get. So,
So here's what was reported from the beat. They never
yeah.
thought they were getting a second, third round pick because
Okay, so they
of
just
like
think they're getting the 1/3 round pick. Okay.
yeah, because Grenard only has like a 33% snap share over the first 4 years of his career, and they're probably expecting him to play around 90%, which would skyrocket his point total with how over the cap kind of has things listed, and
Gotcha.
that would take them out of the third round pick range anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So then you're looking at a situation where they're sort of depleted for their draft picks next year, even with
Mhm.
the expected comp add. So you just have to be really okay with the growth of the current roster and essentially it's not a full punt on next year's draft, but you're just not getting a lot of depth. So you've got to
Yeah.
be okay with the depth of your team and where you're at and where they're going within, I think, the next 2 to 3 year window. So Turner specifically for this team, especially in a Brian Flores defense, I think is
Mm-hmm.
very, very valuable for, the fact that they have Grenard as well, the fact that they brought in Andrew Van Ginkel, who's coming off a really good year. You throw Turner into that mix as well. It's a really good edge rush rotation, and I think it's going to be really nice moving forward. Again, you've just got to be okay with sort of the bets you've already made throughout the rest of the roster, knowing that you don't have as deep of a draft class next year to bring in a lot of guys.
And I'm really wondering, because you mentioned the depth, the Vikings have really prioritized undrafted free agency, and they hit a couple home runs. I mean, one of them was a special teamer. Najee Thompson was phenomenal on special teams last year for the Vikings. Then Ivan Pace Jr. turned into a starter pretty quickly as a UDFA, which you don't have happen often, but you also don't have a middle linebacker whose best trait is pass rushing at 5'11". So they were able to capitalize there. When it comes to the team building aspect, Trevor, we have limited draft capital, and you always want to have more, because if you have more assets, it's going to be a lot easier for you to accomplish things, because at the end of the day, these are all calculated bets, because you have to do your research and try and make sure that you're doing the best you can. How much is it going to matter for the Vikings to maybe have a little bit less with that investment with Turner? Because they have the superstar wide receiver, they have bookend tackles, they have their quarterback of the future. Now they have 3 edge rushers. They have a cornerback room that they like and has a lot of talent, but somebody's just got to step up. They seem pretty good at premium positions. So should the concern level be there that high when it comes to not having draft capital next year? The answer is yes, but I think it might be a little more complex than that.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, it's, I hesitate, because the answer is yes, because like you said, the NFL draft, for as much as I love it and I trust my own evaluation, and it's something that that I really love to do, it's a throw at the dartboard. It is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, you're just trying to hit a bullseye on these guys. And the fact of the matter is, the more darts you have in your hand, the better chance you have to hit a bullseye. That's really what it is. And obviously, like, the first round picks, it's a little bit bigger of a dart to throw, and 7th round picks, it's like a needle that you're trying to throw to get at the stick. But the less darts that you have to throw, the worse you're going to be, just from a numbers perspective, just from a numbers game. Now, there could be a stretch where you just absolutely nail the draft for a couple of years in a row, but that's something where you hope that you're recognizing that and you're putting your foot on the gas pedal. And maybe the Vikings feel that way about some of the young guys that they've drafted over the last couple of years. Like you said, maybe they really do believe that they're close. Maybe they really do believe that, hey, 4 to 6 game sample size of Sam Darnold this year, the rest of it going to McCarthy. 2025, McCarthy's going to be the unquestioned starter for them going into the year. Maybe they have full confidence that, okay, yeah, Detroit's probably the king of the division right now, but maybe a year later, maybe they'll lose some guys to free agency. Maybe they won't be as strong. Maybe you can catch the Packers and what we've seen from Jordan Love, and you could really rebound there. I mean, you obviously got to keep pace with what the Bears were able to do and who they drafted in Caleb Williams and the team that they put around them. But Vikings, very clearly, I think that they saw the situation around them with, as good as the Lions are, with as good as Jordan Love played and as high that the ceiling is for Caleb Williams. And they said, hey, we're going to match it, right? We're going to make sure that we come away with a quarterback in this draft. I know they try to get May, but they come away with McCarthy at number 10. And I love the fact that they only had to move up one spot to go get him. And then they get super aggressive and they go get Turner to make sure that, again, they're putting their foot on the gas pedal, because that's, I guess, where they want to be is more guys on the roster and sort of just letting the chips fall where they may, letting the cards ride, whatever analogy you want to use. They're putting themselves in a position to continue to be in that conversation for who can potentially get a wild card or maybe even a division over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and this division is so fascinating to watch, because you have Jared Goff now making over $50 million, Caleb Williams, and then the enigma of Jordan Love, who seems to just be confusing to pinpoint when you talk to pretty much anybody. The Vikings as a whole, though, I want to pick your brain here, and then I want to move on to some draft stuff, because that's where our hearts really lie. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's looking at doing some Moneyball stuff, and he's already Moneyballed a little bit at safety. And he signed Josh Metellus to that 2-year, $8 million extension last year, and that paid off in a major way. Blake Brandel is kind of the next guy, it seems like, to be in that mold. 3 years, $9.5 million. And then he brings back Dalton Risner for 1 year, max of $2.4 million. And it feels like he's trying to use the guard position as his Moneyball approach, because my personal belief has always been guards don't matter, in the sense that if you have average, you're fine. Just don't be a disaster and be good. That's all I ask. And it feels like he kind of feels the same way, where all you have to do is be average. And if you're average, you can make it work. Do you think that's a good approach, considering how they're building out the rest of the roster? And do you think it can work?
Yeah, I think that it is a good approach, especially for the two positions that you listed. I think that, again, going back to the earlier conversation that we had about contracts, offensive line and secondary play, where you don't want to have a weak link, you can also make a guy look better if the surrounding cast is better, right? And you're in a situation in Minnesota where you've got Brian O'Neill, you've got Christian Darrisaw. I mean, you've got Garrett Bradbury. Like you have players who are good at their positions, and like you said, the money's got to come from somewhere. You can't pay everybody on your team top 20% of the market of whatever their position is. And if I'm going to play money ball at some positions, it's going to be along the interior offensive line and probably at safety / nickel defender. Like, that's where I'm going to play money ball, because there's a lot of options out there. And not only can the floor be high for those players, but like you said, as long as you're not disastrous, you're okay. Like, you can get by with some of those players. It's hard to have 4 really good offensive linemen and 1 like really bad guard, and you not be able to mask that a little bit, right? Depending on where you have the front and the back side of most of your runs, what kind of run concepts you're going with, where your progressions are and where you're looking off of the snap, how much help you're getting from the guys around you, what you're doing with an extra running back or tight end and pass protection. Like, you can make up for that stuff. Whereas at other positions, if there's a glaring talent deficiency, it's harder to make up for it.
Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see what it looks like. One more question before draft stuff. And we talked about this at length last week on the show. What happens if Sam Darnold has a Drew Brees 2004 season? Because Brees was going in the final year of his deal, and then he balled out. I think he made the Pro Bowl in 2004, and they franchised him in 2005. And they kept him, and they kept Phillip Rivers, the 4th overall pick, on the bench. We're in a different landscape today. But if Darnold just finally takes his talent and maximizes it and just has an incredible year, from a team building standpoint, Trevor, how do you approach that? What is your plan of attack with Darnold and potentially keeping him for even longer?
Yeah, first thing is that's by far the best case scenario, right? I mean, like, whether you want to say like, oh, like timeline of JJ McCarthy, and then it gets, messy next offseason, whatever. If you have a good quarterback, you don't give that up in any way, shape, or form. So like, that is best case scenario for them. Even if next year's negotiations get a little bit tough, I mean, you could be in a situation where, like, you either sign and trade him or tag and trade him or something like that, or maybe even let him walk. And if you let him walk, guess what? You're getting a major comp pick back, because he's probably signing a massive contract somewhere else. So it's like, that is best case scenario for them. And that would be something for Darnold to obviously be able to maximize what was 3rd overall talent when he was coming out of the draft, going number 3 overall. And so, look, I don't think that Sam Darnold's going to be the worst starter in the NFL next season, but I don't expect a 2004 Drew Brees type of renaissance from him. So the truth is probably somewhere in between of those polar scenarios. But it would be interesting. I think it would be very interesting. And I would have, if Darnold is really balling out the way that you would want him to, where he's either worthy of a franchise tag or even a future contract, like, at that point, you've got great quarterback play. You make it happen. You keep him around. Again, you let JJ McCarthy sit the bench. He's one of the youngest players in this past draft class. And I get it. Like, it would be wasting another year of his rookie contract. But if you already have good quarterback play, it doesn't really matter as much as it does for other things.
No, it 100% doesn't. And I'm going to be very intrigued to kind of see how that plays out because right now McCarthy's QB3, and I think that's fine. They're working on so many mechanical things with him. So, yeah, before we move on, Trevor, I do have to ask you, and I'm going to give you a chance to defend your opinion here. The Vikings
Mhm.
quarterback situation ranked 31st in the NFL. I would like to hear a little bit more of your opinion on that because I think if now correct me if I'm wrong, that article applies to just 2024, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
it's just the upcoming season. So, honestly, like, this is just my prediction. This is how I see things playing out. I think Darnold will play anywhere from 4 to 6 games this season.
Mhm.
I look at that as a week 7 or week 8. They've got a bye week right
Bye
around
week,
there. Like,
week 6, week 7, home against the
it's
Lions.
home against the Lions. So that is where I'm like, okay, you gave Sam Darnold up to that point. You make the switch to McCarthy. He's got the full bye week. You're playing at home. I know you're playing the Lions, but I mean, it is what it is. You got to
Mhm.
play somebody. So it's at home. It's after the bye week. And then I think McCarthy's going to go through his ups and downs. He's going to take his lumps
Mhm.
next year. So that is it. Just I feel like it's going to be a little bit of an up and down quarterback situation. And again, I like Darnold, but it's hard for me to sit here and say, oh yeah, like he's going to play way better than he has over the last 2 to 3 years
Mhm.
that we have seen from him. So I think there's the reason why that one is so low is honestly because there is a handful of young quarterback situations from even last year's draft that the
Mhm.
outlook for them, if they're able to take the next step, is pretty big. Like even Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will
Yep.
Levis, like those are guys who are all ahead of the where the Vikings are in that ranking because I think those are young guys who really have a ton of potential who could really take the next step. So, in all honesty, like the quarterback duo of McCarthy and Darnold could certainly be higher, but I'm factoring in a lot of
Mhm.
those younger guys getting better this upcoming year.
That makes complete sense. At least they were ahead of Bo Nix, and I can sleep well at night. So I'm appreciative of that. Moving on to the 25 draft, Trevor. Very, very impressive looking class so far. I know you guys just started your summer scouting series.
Mhm.
Kudos to you. Graham Mertz, I think he was QB4 for you.
Hell
That
yeah, he
that
was.
hey, go Gators, baby. You can't see it, but there's a picture of the swamp right above my head. Uh
Let's go.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about this defensive tackle class. It feels like the Vikings made a calculated bet with Dallas Turner this year because the defensive tackle class is so deep this next year. And I believe one of the way too early mocks, I think it was from Dane Brugler, had 18 of the 32 picks in the trenches. And obviously, it's a little easier to project some of the trench guys way early before you see the skill guys blossom. But how
Right.
good can this defensive tackle class be? And are there going to be a lot of realistic options for the Vikings in that round one range?
Yeah, I think so is the answer to the question. We haven't gotten to defensive tackle for summer scouting yet, but
Hmm.
I've taken a peek at some of these guys because I was at least in the room when Dalton and Max were kind of coming up with the initial 2025 rankings for the PFF big board. When we flipped over the mock draft simulator, so you could have that. Mason Graham from Michigan's dude. He's sick. I mean, the second half of the season, especially like down the stretch, like against Ohio State and in the Big Ten championship and throughout the playoffs. I mean,
Yeah.
this dude's a monster. 6'3", 215 pounds. He gets off the ball unbelievably quick. When he pins his ears back, he's so impossible to stop. It feels like so. Mason Graham was one of my favorite players that I got even a glimpse at when we were putting that big board together. Deion Walker, the defensive tackle from Kentucky, is one of the most uniquely built individuals I've ever seen in my life. He's 6'6",
Hmm.
350 pounds. I mean, the power speed combination that he has is stupid, and
Hmm.
like he's kind of like built weird because he holds a lot of weight like in his gut, and his ankles and his calves are like smaller than you would expect for like a
Hmm.
350-pound human being. And so sometimes like the eye test of Walker, it kind of throws you off a little bit, but
Yeah.
the production speaks for itself. I mean, how he's able to get in the backfield, he's been fantastic. Tyleek Williams from Ohio State, somebody who I think really took a step up this past year. I like Tyleek Williams more than I liked Michael Hall Jr., who a lot of people liked in this
Hmm.
past year's draft class. Um, You got two guys from South Carolina, Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders. I like TJ Sanders a lot in the early half of last season, sort of cooled off, and that's why he returned to school. He didn't declare because he didn't kind of continue that momentum, but he's somebody who I think is really good. Thor Griffith from Harvard was a dude who I noticed 2 years ago because around week 4 or 5 of college football, sometimes I'll just go, okay, let's widen the scope here. Every team in college football, let's do it. I'll go to the defensive players and I'll say, who's the highest guy that we have ranked this year? And 2 years ago, like Thor Griffith, the defensive tackle from Harvard, was like 98. He had like a 98 PFF grade. I was like, okay, who is this? And the competition level that he's going up against isn't great, but he is somebody too who I don't think he's going to be a first round or anything, but he is somebody who brings some depth to this defensive tackle class. But it is a good group from what I've seen, even just on a surface level.
Yeah. Deion Walker, and this is going to feel kind of lazy because we went to the same school, but his body type really reminds me of top 5 pick Dwayne Robertson, where Robertson had kind of had that weird looking gut, but he was really explosive off the ball. What do you do with a guy like that? Because obviously he's an outlier in terms of how he moves and what his size is. And we dealt a little bit with this with Jordan Davis, but Walker is much more bendy in my limited viewings than Davis was. How do you treat an outlier like this?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to kind of with him. It really is just like you got to watch the tape, see the production. You've got to be able to see how he wins one-on-one. Is it repeatable at the NFL level, or is he just bullying guys at the college level because he's sort of like uniquely built? And there's just very, very few players that can win off of unique build alone at the NFL level. And so for Walker, it's going to have to be how technical is he? And again, I haven't watched him yet for summer scouting. I've only seen kind of the glimpses of him, but is he really able to win in a translatable way that would tell you, okay, is this guy going top 5, or is he going to slide a little bit because some teams might be hot and cold on kind of just like how he's built and how he wins?
Yeah, I'm going to be really intrigued to kind of dive into that. Final thoughts, Trevor, when looking at this 2025 class, what really stands out to you as far as positional groups? We talked about defensive linemen. Wide receiver looks potentially ridiculous once again. Anything else kind of jump out before? Obviously, you haven't dived into the entire class yet, but I'm just curious your overall thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that wide receiver, I think there's a lot of studs at the top. Luther Burden, Tatario McMillan. I think I said his first name right, from Arizona. I mean, he's a stud.
We're gonna say his name wrong the entire process. He's the new Olu Fashanu. I know he's true. My brother-in-law is Hawaiian, and I've asked him, and he's like, I don't know. Like, and McMillan's from Hawaii too. It's just it's got like 3 different ways you can say it.
It makes me feel a little bit better. It makes me feel a bit better. But even beyond like those guys, Emeka Buka, who we talked about in last year's class, Evan Stewart, Isaiah Bond, like there's a lot of really good receivers. When it comes to like corners, Travis Hunter, unicorn, obviously, but Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison, again, corner studs. I think those guys, I haven't seen a ton, but they feel like first rounders. Malachi Starks, I've been waiting to draft Malachi Starks for like 2 years now. The same stud. This running back class, I just finished my running back rankings, and I gave 3 guys late first, early second round grades. So potential first round grades. So there's already 3 backs that I think could legitimately be first round picks in this upcoming draft. So running back, super talented, super deep. Quarterback, it's not as star studded at the top as what last year's class was, but there's a lot of really intriguing players. Like I found myself being like, okay, well, I want to watch this one other guy. I got through 15 guys for summer scouting, and I already have 5 more that I want to watch before the season starts. So maybe not as solidified at the top, but a ton of names to know, a ton of intrigue there. So I would say running back, really talented, corners, really talented, defensive back in general, really talented, wide receiver, really talented. You got 2 great offensive tackles in Kevin Banks Jr. from Texas and Will Campbell from LSU. And then a lot of intrigue of who's going to take that QB1 title. And is it worth the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, that it's It's going to be so interesting because I counted 10 guys just on first glance that I would consider in the top 64. Like this running back class is bonkers. And everything in the NFL has been cyclical. You can see something go out of vogue and then come back in vogue. And with the linebackers always coming in seemingly at like 220, 230 pounds, can we see a renaissance of the running game with a class like this where it's just incredibly deep with talent?
Yeah, and I think so, because like a lot of these backs aren't gimmicky college backs. Like Quinshon Judkins is 220 pounds. Ollie Gordon's 225. Like Omarion Hampton's 220, 225. Like these are big boys. Like these are like legit running backs. I mean, like DJ Giddens is well over 200 pounds. Nick Singleton is like the next freak running back athletically. Yep. I don't think he quite plays as successfully as, I guess Saquon Barkley or something like that. But Raheem Sanders, who's like 6'2", 235. I think the NFL is going to be less wary of this running back class, not just because of the talent level, but also because these guys are built for the league. And that was a big takeaway when I was going through these guys as well.
I'm excited for April already, but I don't want to skip the football season. Trevor, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about this Vikings team, and I'm excited to see what it looks like moving forward. I know you guys have a lot of great stuff over at PFF, and specifically the NFL Stock Exchange, where the addicts are always crazy.
Man.
Where can the people find you and your work, and what do you have planned?
All the written stuff over at profootballfocus.com. And then, like you said, NFL Stock Exchange, we're going through our YouTube series right now of summer scouting. So position by position, we're giving you we try to give you our top 10s going into the year. We end up probably talking about, 15 of these guys for every position. We got the quarterback episode out right now. Running back episode out is, that's going to come out later tonight, which is Monday evening. And then we'll have, tight ends, wide receivers, get to every single position as the summer goes on. But it's one of my favorite series that we get to do because it's a first look for us as much as I think a lot of people who watch and listen to the show for what the 2025 NFL draft class is going to be.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive in. I have not watched the quarterbacks yet because I want to get into some of these guys myself. And I'm excited to kind of see the actual thoughts rather than just a Twitter graphic. Dave, do you have any questions for Trevor before we send it home?
Well, I was going to ask him what the schedule is for the rest of the summer, and when does the honest and true college tracking for the 2024 season start for you guys?
Yeah. So we have an initial big board out right now, but everything really starts to ramp up, I would say, in August, like right before the season, because we'll be done with summer scouting by then. The big board will get expanded and it will turn over to my rankings, what I had in preseason. And then that'll just, I think as we build out like the mock draft simulator as well, like as you kind of, whenever people want to get into mock draft stuff, which right now, I mean, you can do it right now at pff.com if you wanted to, but once you get around like August, we're going to put a ton of early strengths and weaknesses, some early player comps, some early like recruiting background for all of these guys that are going to be in there. So that's really what I would say August, to answer your question, is when a lot of the summer scouting information and notes that we're going to take is going to be on the website for everybody to access kind of as we get into the college football season.
That sounds great. I look forward to it.
Yeah, we're big draft nuts here, Trevor. Thank you once again. I greatly appreciate all your time. Guys, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. And that way we can bring more awesome guests like Trevor on the show and we can have even more fun. And you want to ring the bell to make sure you know whenever we're going live and who we're going live with. Until we see you on Wednesday night, I'm Tyler. He's Trevor. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings, everybody.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!